Chapter 23. Fisherman's Horizon. Squall left Rinoa down below in the headmaster's old office as he rode the lift up alone to respond to the intercom call. As he reached the top, he could hear the headmaster both over the intercom and in person speaking.
Everybody, please remain calm. Also, please do not leave the garden under any circumstances until you are permitted to do so by myself. We will try to get things back in order ASAP. Thank you for your cooperation.
The intercom dinged happily again as Sid put the microphone down on the console that someone had since torn the access panel off of to gain access to the wiring. He turned around to Squall and nodded at him.
Thank you for coming so quickly. Here are your orders. We've landed, to use the term a bit liberally, on Fisherman's Horizon. I want you to go ashore with Rinoa and Zell. Find the local mayor and apologize for this accident. Tell them that we come in peace. You may explain our situation if you need to. Take a look around while you're there, too. I hear that Fisherman's has some of the best engineering this side of Esthar. Yes, sir.
And why was he the one that had to go? Squall thought grumpily. Sid tilted his head and must have seen something on his face.
Is there a problem? No, sir.
So many. Too many to list. Sid smiled at him.
SEED is not just a special force for combat. I want you to see the world. To broaden your horizons, so to speak. There is more to the world than fighting. I have high expectations for you, Squall.
Hein, why?
Now go. The longer we wait, the worse it looks on us.
The headmaster smiled. Oh, whatever. At least with these orders he was no longer sitting around letting his own thoughts eat at him. He spared a single thought for the moment missed with Rinoa as he turned and hit the return switch on the platform. She was smiling at him as he came back down again. Zell, despite not having been called, had invited himself up as he had before when he heard Squall being summoned.
So?
Rinoa asked, smiling.
Do we have new orders?
There goes that wee stuff again. She knew she wasn't SEED, right? Well, it wasn't like the headmaster hadn't included her in his instructions.
Yeah, what's up?
Zell asked.
We heading down to Fisherman's?
Squall nodded once.
We're to go ashore here and find the mayor. We're to make an official apology, then observe the town. How exciting!
Rinoa clapped.
I've always wanted to see Fisherman's Horizon. I hear they get the best view of the sunrise and sunset here. And it's a town in the middle of the ocean. It's pretty cool,
Zell agreed.
Yo, Squall, we gotta use the second floor deck to get outta here though. The front gates are kinda halfway underwater at the moment.
Squall nodded and stepped forward. He already felt more comfortable now that he had a list of things he needed to do. Find the mayor. Apologize. Observe. Report. It was a rather simple mission as missions went, but at least it would keep his mind off of things. The memory of Rinoa so close he could almost taste her hit him again regretfully. Observing a town wasn't the only way to keep his mind off of things. She was practically humming beside him though as they made their way to the deck. Honestly, she was just happy that she was making such progress with Squall. He had almost kissed her. Ah! She could feel her toes curling already in anticipation. The garden had done a great deal of damage in its landing. There was a lot more debris littering the ocean floor now. and the metal girders and support beams that made up the outer edges of the town had collapsed against the second-floor deck, forming a handy bridge. When Squall stepped out, it was to see that representatives for the town had already come forward to meet whoever would come out. They were standing on the debris, trying to make it easier to cross as they waited.
"Here they come,"
the biggest man in front said as Squall stepped down. He moved forward and stopped just short of the makeshift bridge. The two groups looked each other over critically for a long moment. A second man behind the big one in front spoke up.
"Hey, we've come to warn you before you go ashore. You're Balamgarden, aren't you? So you must be fighters. Seed, maybe. In that case, you need to know the law around here. Do not engage in any type of armed conflict within the city. We are a peaceful people and we do not tolerate belligerence here. Do you understand?"
the man in front asked, his voice hard. Squall nodded once, accepting their rules gracefully.
"Yes. We are representatives of the garden and we've come in peace."
The men exchanged a glance and looked over Squall once more.
"Your weapons," they said.
Squall's eyes moved down to his gun blade, still attached to his hip from running through the training center earlier. Wordlessly, he reached down and lifted it. He returned it to the inside of his inventory. Behind him, Zell took off his gauntlets and slipped them into one of the large pockets on his shorts. Squall turned back and looked as Rinoa removed her blaster edge regretfully. He reached out and took it from her. Her eyes were a bit surprised as he put that into his inventory after the gun blade. But then she looked grateful because she wouldn't have to leave it behind. Squall turned back and held out his hands to show that the weapons were put away. They still held them, but they were out of sight. Which was as far as Squall wanted to go. The men of Fisherman's nodded once, accepting that compromise.
"Welcome to Fisherman's Horizon,"
the second man smiled at him peacefully.
"We just call it FH.
The man in front pointed over his shoulder.
"You should go visit the mayor. His house is in the middle of the city. He's the head of FH,
a third guy, in the back, spoke up.
"We'll do just that,"
Squall nodded once.
"Good,"
the man in front nodded.
"Looks like we understand each other."
Two of the men turned back. The largest one in front though clicked his tongue as he looked over the large garden and the destruction it had made.
"Man, this is a hell of a mess." "I'm terribly sorry,"
Squall said formally.
"It was inevitable. I'm afraid we lost control of our garden." "Nah, don't worry about it,"
the man smiled.
"What's important is that nobody got hurt. We love fixing stuff around here anyway. So you just kick back and enjoy your stay."
Squall nodded once as the man turned to start back.
"Nice people,"
Rinoa smiled as they moved forward.
"Yeah, real pacifists,"
Zell agreed.
"I read that this town has a really strict no-violence policy. They're the only town in the entire world that's never hired Seed before. Well, them and Esthar, but Esthar doesn't really count." "No way,"
Rinoa laughed. The garden had crashed into the outer limits of FH. The people had already started coming out of the town though, rushing around to the damaged areas like ants on a disturbed hill. Squall found that, almost immediately after the makeshift bridge, the three of them began walking down paths that had been created by cranes and ladders to get the people out to the garden. The metal was rusted from their position on the sea, and it all looked rather slapped together, but a Seed always appreciated function over form and there was no denying it worked. They crossed under the shadow of an enormous silo that housed fresh water that had been purified from the ocean. On the other side, they were greeted by one of the men that had been waiting for them, who was operating a lift that led from the silo to the city proper.
"So, you guys going to SDR?"
he asked, hitting some buttons on the lift, attempting to make friendly conversation.
SDR?
Squall repeated, one eyebrow going up in surprise. How could they possibly get to SDR from here? The man didn't get the unspoken question and assumed Squall didn't know what he meant.
"Yeah, you know, that high-tech city in the east? It's just beyond the train tracks. A lot of people who stop here go there. The trains are down at the moment though, so the best way to get there is to walk from here." What a joke, hey? Well, anyway, you guys only got here by accident, right? I guess I shouldn't keep you.
The lift he was calling from below locked into place and he reached out to grab the gate.
Okay, go ahead and get on. Whoa.
Rinoa ran to the front of the lift and looked out over the town. It wasn't just the makeshift bridge to the garden. The entirety of FH looked like it had been cobbled together using scrap metal. Everything was covered in a film of rust because of the salty sea air. All except one place. The center of town was not hard to find. It was surrounded on all sides by an enormous dish that was filled to the brim with bright solar panels that provided energy to the town. Set in deliberate, ever-expanding circles, and reflecting the great expanse of the blue sky above, it was breathtaking to behold. The lift lowered them down towards the city and Rinoa laughed.
"What's up?"
Zell asked.
"I just can't believe I'm here,"
she breathed.
"At FH? This isn't exactly a tourist trap. Or even that hard to get to." "Yeah, but
her father would never have let his daughter come here. She would never have been in Balam Garden, for that matter. Squall wasn't the only one who got to expand his horizons. Rinoa had never felt so free in her life. At the base of the lift, it was almost a straight shot down towards the mayor's house, which they could make out faintly in the center of all the solar panels. Though the mayor's house took pride of place in the city, it was rather common looking. Squall stepped up the stairs leading to the front door, thinking that it was probably the most humble house he had ever seen for a leader of any kind. Though, actually, when he compared it to the other ramshackle houses in the area, it was actually more of a palace. The door was unlocked, why wasn't he surprised? And fell open easily when he tried to knock.
"Oops,"
Zell said as Rinoa laughed.
"Hello,"
Squall called, sticking his head in and looking around.
"Upstairs,"
came the response from a male throat. Squall shared a look with the others as they stepped inside. Who invited someone into their house without knowing who it was? On the second floor, Squall was greeted by a frowning man wearing shorts and a yellow shirt covered in flowers. Behind him, a woman who looked like she had just smelled something unpleasant watched them as they stepped up to the pair. Hanging from the ceiling all around them were what looked like miniature flying machines.
"Please, have a seat,"
the mayor said, gesturing before him. Squall took a knee. Rinoa and Zell actually sat down.
"I am Mayor Dobe. Allow me to get to the point, when are you leaving?"
the man asked shortly. Well, that was blunt. He certainly wasn't waiting any time.
"We'll leave as soon as the garden is capable of moving,"
Squall said, thinking that moment couldn't get here fast enough.
"Any idea when?"
Mayor Dobe brought the end of a long pipe to his mouth and took a drag. The smoke he expelled smelled like a mixture of lighter fluid and cement paste.
"I'm afraid not,"
Squall said, resisting the urge to cough in the cloud of smoke.
We only discovered that our garden was mobile a short while ago and the engine died before we were able to figure out how to pilot it. We're still in the process of trying to understand everything.
The mayor nodded once, accepting that.
Our technicians will assist you. They should be able to repair and service everything. We won't even charge you for labor, only supplies. How does that sound?
Squall frowned. That would mean they would need to let outsiders into the garden. They would need to let them play around with an engine that none of them understood. He didn't have the authority to make this decision on his own. He told the mayor as such and he nodded again.
Go consult with your leader then. If he wishes to talk about the cost, I'll be willing to go over it with him. Though I can't imagine Balam Garden is hurting for your dirty blood money.
Squall's eyebrow raised at the disgust in his tone. Blood money? Well, he supposed the garden did run because of seed, but he hadn't heard it referred to as blood money before. Kind of evocative imagery for something that Squall thought was merely a service to the world. He stood up to leave, fully prepared to get out of this smoke.
Excuse me,
Rinoa spoke up, frowning at him.
Why do you want us to leave so badly?
Please, just keep your mouth shut, Squall frowned at her. They must have their reasons. Who really cared anyway? It was too late. The mayor was already blowing out another puff of smoke.
We don't want military organizations in FH. Seeds especially. You rely on force to solve problems. That is in direct defiance of our principles.
Her voice squeaky and thready, his wife spoke up from behind him.
We believe that any problem can be settled by discussion. If you reach a mutual understanding, there is no need to fight.
No argument there, Squall agreed. Trite and dull as hell though.
Violence only leads to more violence,
the mayor continued sagely.
We believe your presence here will attract violence. That's why we want you to leave as soon as possible.
Squall nodded to the others.
Let's go back to garden.
Rinoa and Zell stood and hastened after him down the stairs and out of the building. The fresh air, scented by metal and the sea, was a welcome relief from whatever the mayor had in that pipe. Squall took in a deep breath gratefully as he started back up through the solar panels.
Man, that geezer pissed me off.
Zell growled, stomping his foot. Honestly, Squall was just happy he hadn't done something in the mayor's home.
Squall, why didn't you tell him off? Forget it,
Squall called back to him, refusing to stop.
You can't expect everyone to welcome us. He could have been a little less rude though,
Rinoa agreed with Zell.
He treated us like common criminals he was trying to bribe out of his house.
As Zell and Rinoa took turns bashing the mayor and his unpleasant wife, Squall's eyes narrowed at the top of the rim of the bowl housing the panels. There was a man there. He was running right towards them. He caught sight of them and started screaming.
GGG Galbadian soldiers!
Squall and Rinoa shared a look as they started running. They rushed up out of the bowl and towards the town. They looked around quickly and Squall frowned to see that the peaceful streets of FH were now being filled with mechs and soldiers.
They're coming from that way,
Zell pointed down the street.
We should report this to the headmaster,
Squall said.
Wait.
They turned around to see the mayor's wife, out of breath and panting, coming up from behind them. She glared at Squall hatefully.
The Galbadians are here because of you, right? They're after you.
Well, maybe. Probably not him specifically, but the garden more likely.
You had better take full responsibility.
She leveled a finger at Squall's chest.
It's your fault.
Squall rolled his eyes. Fine, they'd take care of them. He didn't much like the sound of her tone when she asked though.
No, Flo,
Mayor Dope sneered, coming from behind his wife.
We mustn't rely on them. They won't be able to do anything without resorting to violence.
Wait, Squall frowned. Please don't say he was going to try to reason with them.
I'll go talk to them,
Mayor Dope said, his voice smug and superior as he started walking away. Well, he's dead, Squall thought to himself. Flo continued to look at them with a disgusted grimace.
What?
Rinoa asked her, getting angry at that expression.
A blood peddler like you would never understand,
Flo sneered. Zell growled at her and Rinoa stepped around Squall to stop in front of the woman.
You know, maybe we won't go save your husband. We won't.
Zell raised an eyebrow at Squall who shrugged.
You two are still under my command, right?
Rinoa looked back at them.
And my ordering you back to the garden doesn't fly in the face of Sid's orders, right? So if I wanted, I could keep them from helping your husband at all, old woman. When did you get vindictive?
Squall asked, almost grinning. It was a hollow threat. Rinoa would never do it. She was just trying to get under the woman's skin. Squall found it amusing to watch. The threat didn't touch the woman at all.
Go ahead. At least my husband will have died with honor. I can rest easy at night knowing that we never stooped to your level. How about you, girl? Can you say you have a clear conscience hanging off of a bloodbringer's arm? You're a mercenary's whore. Does it feel good?
Rinoa cried out in anger and tried to jump at the old woman. Squall's arm shot out so quickly and took her by the waist that it surprised both women. Rinoa struggled to get out of his grasp and reach the old woman who had fallen backwards almost on her butt against the metal ground. Squall pulled Rinoa back against himself, his arm tight around her. She was still growling.
Take that back, old woman!
She was yelling, trying to grab for her with one hand and uselessly pulling at Squall's iron grip with the other.
You take that back! Come on, Zell,
Squall said calmly, jerking his head forward.
We have to catch up with the mayor before he gets himself into trouble.
Zell, who was growling at Flo, nodded in compliance with the order. It obviously took some force of will for him to turn around though. Rinoa and the old women continued throwing vitriol at each other.
Blood whore! Sanctimonious witch!
As Squall jerked Rinoa up bodily. He rested her on his hip so that she was now able to kick back against the old woman who maintained a strong distance. Rinoa's strength couldn't be compared to Squall's though, and he walked away almost normally, even carrying her one-handed, struggling in the air. As they were walking after the mayor, Flo sent Rinoa an obscene gesture. In return, Rinoa lifted her voice and screamed out over the distance,
and yes, it feels great to be his whore. Whoa!
Zell was taken aback as Rinoa continued to growl in Squall's grasp.
Have you two really? No,
Squall cut him off.
She's just talking. Rinoa, can I put you down now or will you try to attack her again?
Squall's arm was cutting rather painfully into her abdomen, making it hard to breathe. So she nodded and he paused so he could put her back on her feet. She threw one last glare at Flo, who had already turned to go back to her house.
Delusional sea hag,
she hissed venomously.
What right does she have to judge you anyway?
Squall frowned.
Wait, is that why you got mad? Because she called me a blood-bringer. Of course. How dare she?
Rinoa cursed, straightening her clothes angrily.
She acts all holier than thou, but she doesn't know a thing about you. It's not like you take joy in killing people. You provide a necessary service for the world that no one else is willing to do.
Squall and Zell stared at her as they walked. She noticed their silence and turned.
What? Nothing.
Zell looked away quickly. Squall continued to look at her, feeling somehow pleased at the stance she had taken on his profession and lifestyle.
You called yourself a whore,
he finally said softly. Rinoa's face turned bright red and she jerked her gaze forward.
Yeah? Well, I didn't mean it like. I wasn't just going to let her. Ugh. You know what I meant?
Yeah, he did. He wasn't sure what he thought about the proclamation. Or the fact that Zell, who couldn't be trusted to keep a secret, had been the one to hear it.
And now we have to go save her ungrateful husband,
she continued grumbling.
And you know he thinks the same way she does. I don't like either of them.
She was angry for him. More than that, she had made a spectacle of herself in public for him. She didn't appear to regret it either. Squall knew he should be mortified or even just embarrassed at what she had yelled, but he felt only a strange, possessive joy at the implications of the proclamation.
Yo, Squall,
Zell pointed.
Jamie thugs. Can we pull out our weapons now? Might as well,
Squall shrugged. He reached into his jacket and pulled out first Rinoa's weapon, then his own. The three of them strapped their weapons in place and Zell grinned as the first soldiers and their mechs reached them. The smoke coming from his nostrils curled up in the air.
Oh, yeah,
he laughed as more soldiers, a whole platoon, came forward. It took them a little while to fight their way across the city. They didn't know where Dobe went when he walked away. However, they figured that following the steady stream of Galbadian soldiers and mechs that fell easily under their weapons would lead them. In the town square at the base of the steps of the train station, the commander of the Galbadian force was meeting with Dobe. He was picking at something on his gun arm while the mayor looked at him beseechingly. But they were still talking. Why were they talking to him if they were after the garden? What were they talking about? On the path up to the square, Squall kneeled down below some scrap metal without a word. Rinoa and Zell followed suit not a moment later, looking to him as he listened over the distance.
I already told you,
Mayor Dobe said, his tone desperate.
I've never heard of this girl named Elone. There is nobody here by that name.
Elone.
Fine,
the leader shrugged carelessly.
We'll just have to torch this city. Wait a minute.
Dobe grabbed for his arm.
I'm telling the truth. I've never seen this girl.
The soldier laughed at him derisively.
It doesn't matter, old man. We were gonna burn this place down anyway. Eddie's orders.
He threw back his head and guffawed loudly.
No, please.
Mayor Dobe dropped to his knees, grasping at his belt.
I beg of you. Don't.
The Galbadian was grinning as he reached forward and closed his large hand around the mayor's neck and lifted. Dobe's legs kicked in the air as he struggled for breath. The Galbadian soldier held him aloft easily, laughing at the sight he made struggling. Like a worm on a hook. Well, that was probably their cue to step in there and help. Squall stood up, Zell and Rinoa followed suit. Laughing, Zell tightened his gloves.
All right. Let's get it on. Rinoa,
Squall said, pulling his gun blade out.
Drop him.
Grinning, Rinoa lifted up her blaster and took aim. Her Valkyrie was no less deadly for being all scratched up and scarred. It flew through the air and sliced down through the Galbadian's arm, just past his glove and into the meat. He cried out and dropped the mayor, and Rinoa caught the blade neatly. Squall stepped forward and the Galbadian soldier glared at him while Mayor Dobe tried to crawl away, coughing and grabbing for his throat in the process.
Who the hell are you?
The G-Army thug asked angrily.
We're Seeds,
Squall said simply, knowing that would be enough.
Seeds.
He took a step back in surprise. Then, instead of fighting them himself, he turned and called out to his subordinates.
Get the ironclad over here.
A loud rumbling started blasting through the air. Squall leaned down over Dobe, who was glaring at all of them equally.
I'm sorry,
he said genuinely.
But we have no choice.
Squall! Zell cried out in warning. Squall stood up again and turned to see that some soldiers had come up from the rear. Then from behind, the leader from the front. That left one for each of them.
Wretched Seeds!
One of the soldiers growled, bearing his sword. Squall watched the captain take aim. He could feel Rinoa and Zell tensing behind him, waiting for his word.
Now,
Squall said calmly. The captain fired. Squall, Rinoa, and Zell dropped and moved at the same moment. Zell, laughing, charged his soldier down. The G-soldier swiped down with his saber. Zell put his hand on the flat of the blade and hefted himself up and over. His foot slammed into the soldier's face. The force sent the man flying, falling from the platform. His body splashed down into the water as Zell hit the ground again, crouching with a grin. Squall ran under and around the bullets. He curved in from the side, and as he got in too close, he brought up a wall of ice that caught the gunfire. He jumped out from behind it and swung his blade up and around. Squall turned back neatly towards the others as the soldier dropped behind him. His eyes immediately went to Rinoa. Crying out, she slid in under the soldier's slash and came in close. He reared his fist back. Rinoa dodged it sloppily, but she dodged it. She slammed her fist into the soldier's abdomen. Her punch did no damage, but she hit the release on her blaster edge and the Valkyrie slammed into his midsection at full speed. His body dropped and Rinoa jumped back, breathing hard. She turned, beaming at Squall, and he nodded in approval. The rumbling that began earlier continued on unabated. If anything, it was getting stronger. Rinoa looked around, frowning as she tried to follow the sound.
I think something's coming.
She took some steps back, holding her weapon. The rumbling continued to grow. And, as it got louder, they were more easily able to place it. They all turned and looked up at a train track that ran over their heads. The massive mech that dropped down on them landed nearly on top of the soldiers whose orders it was supposed to obey. Squall and the others barely jumped out of the way in time. All three of them rolled and came back up again to face the mech. It looked like someone had already gone at it. The blue paint was covered with a thick layer of ash and dust where it wasn't scratched off altogether. There were 2 generators on its head, and places for 4 others that were missing. The parts were sparking where the wiring was exposed. Zell laughed, pulling at his gloves.
Looks like we got a big one on our hands. Let's destroy this thing,
Squall said, facing it confidently.
Thunder!
He shouted, throwing out the spell. The mech shuddered. Then a front hatch fell open and it started shooting. Erratically. Squall and Rinoa hit the deck as Zell ran away.
Zell, hit that panel!
Rinoa ordered, pointing forward.
Done.
Zell sprinted.
What are you doing?
Squall asked. He didn't much care that she had given an order, but he was curious where it was coming from.
I know that thing.
Rinoa laughed.
I know how to fight that thing. Seriously?
Squall looked surprised.
Caraway designed the ironclad series himself. If I can get into the access panel, I can hijack the engine. Back!
Squall snapped. The two of them jumped apart and cannon fire aimed at their torsos zoomed past. Zell came around the side, then, laughing, he pulled back his fist. Burning nearly white-hot, the appendage slammed into the front of the ironclad, just off-center. The heat wasn't enough to break the panel, but his strength was enough to dent it inwards. The corners of the panel bent outwards and Zell had to jump away as the mech tried to body slam him.
We need to rip that panel off,
Rinoa said, pointing to the bent corners.
The access console is under there.
Squall.
All right. Zell, you play keep away. I'll go for the panel. Rinoa, you get ready. Right.
Rinoa and Zell cried at the same time as they began moving.
Hey, big boy!
Zell yelled, running in front of it, in front of its sensors.
Right this way!
The auto-lock mechanism started tracing him as he danced in front of it.
Ifrit, fire!
Zell called, throwing out his fists. The fireballs burst forth with his punches and burst against the ironclad. The heat of the spell did little against the tough hull of the mech except mess with the sensors slightly. Rinoa ran out of the way and fired a thunder spell back at the mech to stall it. While it was twitching and trying to reset from the magic blast, Squall ran forward. He brought up his gunblade and slammed it point first down through the small opening created by the corner beginning to peel up. The force of his blade forced it back further. Squall put one boot against the ironclad and pushed back with his body weight. The screeching of metal on metal hurt his ears as he peeled the panel like a fruit. He dropped the gunblade when it couldn't pull any further and it fell to the ground. He grabbed the panel with both hands and pulled with his own strength. He made slight progress. Then the ironclad let off a volley of shots that Zell narrowly avoided but rocked the mech violently back and forth, dislodging Squall. He hit the ground and rolled away before it could crush him. He cursed to see the panel was only half off.
Zell, finish it!
He sprinted around to the side, in front of the mech's sensors. He and Zell traded places and the machine gun fire started following Squall as he hurtled over debris that now littered the ground because of the Galbadians.
Woo!
Zell slammed his fist into his palm, setting off sparks. He jumped forward and grabbed hold of the panel with one hand. The other, he slammed against the body and turned up the heat. The metal under his hand got red quickly as Ifrit's magic burned through it. The weakened, liquefying metal gave up much easier under Zell's heated grasp. With a loud cry of effort, he ripped it free. It tore from his hands and skidded away. Rinoa jumped over it neatly as she took Zell's place. Being careful not to touch the still red-hot metal, Rinoa put her feet on the bottom of the mech and held onto the top of the panel. With her free hand, she reached inside and started pushing the wiring around. Behind her, Squall ran past Zell, turning the machine's guns on him. He scooped his gun blade off of the ground and looked back to see Rinoa nearly fall off by the ironclad jerking around.
Blizzard!
He shouted, throwing out the ice spell. The crystals sprang forth and caught against one end of the mech. They grabbed hold of it and it vibrated angrily in one place. But it held mostly still so Rinoa could focus. She ripped out the weapon control cords first. The gun died abruptly. Then she grabbed for the video feed that showed the inside what was going on. The machine broke free of the ice but could not do nothing but twist around. There. Just past the hover control mechanism was the emergency stop. Rinoa slammed her fist down against the lever, flipping it forcefully. She released the mech and fell down onto the ground. She cried out but wasn't down long. Squall ran by, picking her up by the arm and pulled her out of the way as the mech nearly ran her over while it vibrated out of control. The three of them turned back to see the ironclad rocking towards the edge of the platform. It would only take a little more. The emergency exit at the top of the mech broke open just as it was falling over. The three of them were breathing hard as they heard the ironclad splash against the surface. A tower of ocean water burst forth and splashed back against the deck. Shaking, a hand reached up over the edge of the platform. Squall grabbed for his hilt. Selfie, crying out in relief, lifted herself up over the edge.
Selfie!
Zell gasped. Beside her, Quistis forced herself up and over. Just a moment later, Irvine was throwing his leg over the side. He rolled onto his back, panting as Selfie crawled forward. All of them were breathing hard, their limbs shaking like they were grateful to be back on dry land. Selfie lifted her head and her eyes brightened.
Squall!
The smile that broke out over Squall's face in that moment was the first any of them had ever seen. Yes. They're all right. He couldn't imagine what they were doing here or why, but it didn't matter because they were alive. Automatically, it was as affectionate as he knew how to be, he saluted them.
Hey, Selfie,
he said, his voice almost still calm.
Quistis. Irvine.
She laughed at him as she stood and returned his salute. The others followed suit, greeting each other as fellow seeds, even Rinoa and Irvine.
It's great to see you guys,
Squall said, lowering his hand again. He frowned.
Wait, were you inside that mech?
Yeah, Selfie laughed sheepishly.
Sorry. I swear, we weren't trying to shoot you. We were just trying to get out. It's not our fault the explosion damaged most of the control systems.
Explosion? Rinoa repeated, frowning.
Say,
Irvine looked at them, frowning.
What happened to the garden? We couldn't stop the missiles. What are you guys doing all the way out here? Don't tell me we couldn't.
Squall opened his mouth then paused. A lot had happened. He wasn't sure that it was something he could explain without just showing them.
The garden is safe,
he settled for, figuring that was the best answer for now.
Really?
Selfie's eyes lit up as Quistis and Irvine cried out in relief.
Hoo-hoo.
Selfie jumped up and down, nearly crying.
What happened to you guys?
Squall asked, looking between them, confused.
Dude, we've been hiding in that mech forever,
Irvine said, letting out a long breath.
When the base went up. Well, Selfie's a pretty quick thinker. We were lucky that thing was so tough,
Quistis agreed, looking back to the water almost affectionately.
The shock wave of the blast knocked us out, but it didn't kill us. By the time we woke up, Galbadia had already returned and were taking the ironclad to salvage. We were constantly under surveillance, we couldn't escape. You spent almost 5 days locked in the same mech together?
Zell asked, surprised.
How did you not kill Irvine? Hey. Well, we came close,
Quistis admitted.
On that note, can we delay the rest of the report for later? We've been locked in the same mech for 5 days with little food, little water, and no ability to shower. We're not exactly suitable for company right now.
Squall nodded, figuring she was probably right. Headmaster Sid would need to know more than him anyway.
Zell, Rinoa, why don't you two take them back to the garden? I'll see you guys there after I take a look around the town.
Selfie more than Quistis and Irvine looked grateful. Then Quistis looked confused.
Take us back to the garden? That will take us all the way back through timber from here. Not really,
Rinoa giggled.
Come on,
Zell waved them forward.
It's honestly just easier to see it.
The three of them followed after Zell. Rinoa took a couple steps after them then stopped. Biting her lip insecurely, she turned back to Squall. His brow raised curiously and she smiled.
You know, you just surprised me. You looked and sounded so happy to see them.
He had actually smiled. Not a grin, not a smirk, she had seen teeth. Sure, it was brief, but it was there. Knowing the others were alive and well had affected him, and that actually made her happy. Squall looked confused.
It was the first time I've seen you so honest,
she clarified, her cheeks turning pink.
It was really sweet.
Squall wasn't sure that he liked being called sweet any more than he had being called cute. Her eyes looked up at him, shining, and he felt the need to clear his throat and look away. Damn! What was he supposed to say in this situation?
It's not a big deal,
he finally settled on.
I was just relieved to see they were all right. What's so surprising about that? Is there something wrong? No.
She hastened to say, stepping closer to him.
There's nothing wrong at all. They're your comrades, yes, but, moreover, they're your friends.
Friends, hey? He had never thought of them that way before. Rinoa bit her lip again and she looked down at her feet as she twisted gently, her hands behind her back, her cheeks pink again. Damn, but she was cute.
Hey, Squall, would you have been worried about me, too? You know, if I were with them instead.
What? Why was she asking that? What kind of question was that? He didn't know. He hadn't even considered sending her on that mission. He dithered, turning away from her as he thought about it. Rinoa, trapped in a mech just a breath away from death. Not knowing how she fared. 5 long days of not being able to see her. To hear her. They wouldn't have toured the garden. They wouldn't have almost kissed out in the secret area. It was kind of a sad thought.
I don't know,
he managed to get out.
Maybe? I don't know. Oh, my gosh.
Rinoa's hands went to her mouth in surprise. Her big brown eyes widened as she looked at him.
You're turning red.
What? No, he wasn't. Squall quickly looked away from her, willing his heart to calm down.
You're so cute.
She nearly squealed.
Taking it so seriously.
Squall made a face. What the heck? Why was she toying with him? More than that.
Rinoa, you promised.
Oops. She covered her mouth again, giggling at her mistake in calling him cute again.
I'm sorry. I promise, no more after today. Even if you are.
He crossed his arms.
How about adorable? Can I call you that instead?
His eye twitched and she laughed.
Is handsome any better? Marginally. Well, then, what would you prefer I call you? My name.
Rinoa grinned.
But Squall is such a dark name. Who named you after a storm anyway?
Squall blinked. Surprised. Because, truthfully, he didn't know. And he had never given a thought before to where his name had come from. Honestly, he had been an underclassman before he had even learned what it meant. But it had always just been his name. He never really stopped to consider the implications of it or why someone would name a child that.
Oh.
Rinoa frowned.
Right. Sorry. For what?
Rinoa shook her head. She had kind of forgotten that Squall didn't have a family. Even though she had lost really the only good part of it rather young, Rinoa had at least had one.
I'm gonna head back,
she said, taking some steps backwards.
Thanks for the date, today. I had a lot fun. Even if it began and ended with a fight.
Squall thought back to that almost kiss and he was inclined to agree. He wondered if she made him take her on a third date if he would get a full kiss. Rinoa grinned like she could read his thoughts.
By the way, after the third date, I'm going to officially consider us a couple, whether you ask me or not. What?
Squall blinked.
With that in mind, I'm not going to ask you for another date,
she grinned.
If you want another one, you're going to have to come to me. Catch you later, Squall.
Laughing, she turned and ran off, chasing after the others. Girlfriend, hey? Squall had never really given much thought to that before. Even as he was wanting to kiss Rinoa, he didn't know if he wanted to apply that title to her. Not because he objected to her as a partner, but more because he rejected the idea of a partner at all. Shuffling against the stone of the platform caught Squall's attention and he turned to look. Mayor Dobe had crawled over to some rubble that had been knocked down. Squall watched as he reached out and took hold of two pieces of stone that had broken apart upon impact with the ground. With their biggest guns and their captain both gone, the Galbadians were pulling out. They wouldn't stay when they couldn't be the biggest boys on campus. Squall bet if he walked to the station, he would be able to see them sprinting back towards the Galbadian continent. Because the trains were down, they would have no choice. It was kind of funny. But they were leaving behind a smoking town and a mayor with the bruises of a soldier's hands blossoming around his thin neck. Dobe looked up from the stone pieces in his hand and gave Squall a look that wasn't exactly hostile, but nor would he call it friendly.
I guess you saved my life,
he said, his voice soft.
Sorry for butting in,
Squall said, slipping his gun blade back in its sheath.
And sorry for breaking your law. No, you won't be tried or anything. But I'm not thanking you. You don't have to,
Squall shrugged. He wasn't in this for gratitude.
It's just that.
He trailed off and the mayor looked up. What was he trying to say here?
Your people are all about understanding to prevent violence, yet you don't try to understand us. We're not just a bunch of warmongers for hire.
Oh. Dobe's question didn't sound encouraging. Squall let out a breath and cast his mind around for what he was trying to say. To make the mayor understand what they were and why. And why they weren't just blood-bringers.
It's hard for me to explain. I wish.
Squall let out a breath.
I wish everything could be settled without resorting to violence. And there would be no need for battles.
Or torture. Or pain. Or gardens that existed only to train young people to fight in a world filled with monsters that ate the weak. He wished that the opposing opinions that caused people to clash weren't so polarizing, or that people wouldn't cling to them quite so obsessively. Sure, VIII was a group that fought for money, but, more than anything, they were neutral. While Squall had been fighting the sorceress, there were VIIIs working for Galbadia on the other side. VIII held no political stance, had no agenda to further. They put themselves at risk so others wouldn't. But how nice would it be if they didn't have to? Wouldn't it be great if Squall could have taken Rinoa to the Balam beach and spent the day with her under the sun? If the monster's lair wasn't his only idea of a date location? If they could be normal teenagers.
Like you've been preaching, it would be wonderful if things could be settled by discussion,
Squall continued, thinking of everything he had been through.
The only problem with that is that it takes too much time. Especially if the others are not willing to listen. If they refuse to meet an understanding, then what choice are you left with? If they want to destroy your homes, your lives, and nothing you say could stop them. So I believe that fighting is inevitable at times. It's really rather sad.
He cleared his throat, wondering if he sounded as awkward as he felt.
That's all I have to say. I hope you understand us someday, too. I think the world needs both people like you and people like us. Thank you for all your help. Goodbye.
Squall bowed his head slightly to the mayor. To the man that existed as far on the other side of the spectrum from Squall as could possibly be. A man that he could probably never see eye to eye with, yet he dearly wished to. Mayor Dobe was an ideal that Squall couldn't allow himself to dream of. FH had suffered little from the attack. Or maybe they had suffered a lot. Honestly, the town was built of scrap metal and recycled everything. It was always rusty and scuffed. It was hard to see, through eyes that didn't know the town, if the place had suffered overmuch. Squall looked around and observed the people that began rebuilding almost immediately as he had been told, but he kept mostly to himself. He was fully prepared to find a junk shop in the town that loved to make repairs. He was kind of thrown off to find out that they did weapon repairs and upgrades. Down a long plank out of the water, Squall saw a flash of blue and immediately moved towards it. His heart knew it was Rinoa even as his head was insisting she had gone back to the garden.
Did a real number on it, Missy,
the old junk shop owner was saying, laughing over the state of her abused Valkyrie.
What did you do? I shot it into the flight mechanisms of a mech,
Rinoa said, leaning against his counter with a sigh.
It stopped the mech, but now my poor Valkyrie.
Squall stopped walking at the entrance and leaned against the support pole holding up the roof of the open-air junk shop. Rinoa didn't hear him and didn't turn around. So he got to watch her as the junk shop owner clicked his tongue over her weapon.
I don't know that I can fix this, honey. What?
Rinoa cried out, dismayed.
But it's just cosmetic damage. Nope. See this crack here on the wing? It's a hair crack. No, it goes all the way through. See? It won't take much force to snap this out of place. Then it won't fly right, if at all. And looky, here. This crack is just waiting to expand. And this dent here is going to seriously mess with the aerodynamics. Sorry, Missy. You're better off just buying a new blade.
Rinoa cried out, dropping her forehead on the counter.
I don't want to use the pinwheel again. I really liked this one. Now, there,
the old man pat her head.
If it's got an edge, I can handle it. You've come to the right place. The Valkyrie is top of the line for manufactured blades on the Blaster Edge series,
Rinoa said, repeating what the last guy had told her.
Of course it is, but serious weapon collectors, and fighters, all customize their gear. Customize?
Rinoa lifted her head.
Oh, You know, I've got an idea for a new Blaster Edge blade that I've been meaning to try, but I haven't had the parts to do it. Thin, deadly, and fast. The only thing I need to make it is a few screws to adjust your blaster and a saw blade from a bell helmet. A saw blade?
Rinoa's face fell.
Well, I don't actually have any parts. Squall keeps all those and... Here.
She jumped in surprise when Squall dropped the part onto the counter. She looked over to him with big eyes as the junk shop owner looked over the piece.
Squall.
She started.
Upgrading your weapon, too?
He asked, grinning at her. She smiled.
My poor baby was really banged up. It flew kind of wonky against those grats. Very good,
he nodded, proud she had noticed. She was getting better at this. Rinoa's face heated up as the junk shop owner nodded.
This will be perfect. Just leave your blaster with me. I should have it ready by morning. What about you, young man? You upgrade gun blades?
Squall asked, setting his blade and sheath on the counter.
My, this is a fine weapon.
The junk shop owner nearly drooled, reaching out to touch the souped-up revolver on the blade. He pulled it from the sheath delicately and gave a cry.
Squall.
Rinoa frowned in dismay. The formerly pristine blade had been scratched and deformed almost as badly as her Valkyrie. The memory of him slamming it into the ironclad and jerking back against the metal panel hit her and she felt awash with guilt.
Oh, Squall.
She looked at him.
It's fine. I've been meaning to get a new blade anyway. I already know what I want, old man, if you can make it for me.
Squall reached into his inventory and swiped through the list of options. He deposited first a hard turtle shell from the armadillos they had fought. Then a bright red blade. Rinoa gasped. It looked like it had been crafted from fire. The metal twisted and swirled at the blade on both ends, creating a dual-edged sword that would rip and render flesh rather than slice. It even came with an arm guard that extended below the hilt.
A betrayal sword,
Squall said.
I had it custom made in Balam before we left. I want a flame saber. That's high level, boy,
the old man said, now irreverently touching the betrayal sword.
You sure you can handle a blade like that? You sure Shiva will let you have something called a flame saber?
Rinoa asked, grinning.
It's just called that because of the shape and color. It doesn't inherently have fire powers. Well, old man? Can you handle the upgrade? Need some new screws. The ones on your old blade are too damaged. Shall we talk prices?
Squall and the old man haggled for a moment before they came to an agreement not just on his blade but Rinoa's. She tried to protest, but he had already paid for it.
Thanks much for your custom,
the old man smiled.
Hey, those aren't collector's items,
Squall said deliberately, pointing to them.
They need to be able to fight. We're not peaceful FH people.
The old man laughed.
Relax your butt, kid. I know that. I'm old, not stupid. Trust me, you'll never have had a weapon of better quality. I'll have them delivered to your garden tomorrow morning. Or you can come down to get them directly if you want.
Squall nodded and thanked him before turning to leave with Rinoa.
Finished observing the town yet?
She asked, feeling naked without her weapon. She had to resist the urge to scratch her arm where it should be resting.
Not yet. I still have some shopping to do at the item store. Alright. Thanks again for my weapon. You know you didn't have to.
He shrugged.
I wanted to.
Rinoa grinned.
Is that your version of jewelry and flowers? What?
She shook her head.
No. Nothing. Weapons are far more useful anyway. See you back at the garden, Squall.
He watched her go, trying not to be affected by what she had said. Or the implications. He did not want a girlfriend, he repeated to himself. He did not want a girlfriend. He just wanted her. Squall shook his head forcefully and looked away. He was too attached. This was too dangerous. He needed to take a step back away from her. As the day wore on and he ran out of places to walk around to, Squall started back towards the garden. It was starting to get late in the day and he was hungry. He supposed he could have found something to eat here in FH, but he didn't really feel like it. After listening to the man at the lift near the water silo talk, and struggling to remember his face, he started back around the large metal tank. He almost missed Irvine. His clothes blended in rather well with the rusty silo behind him. He grinned as Squall walked around. He had shaved and showered since returning to garden. He had probably eaten as well, but he still looked a little gaunt. That would probably wear off in a few days as he had more proper access to food and water.
Hey,
he said as Squall came in closer.
The headmaster gave the okay to let the technicians into the garden. Which, by the way, moves. I'm still trying to get my head around that one. It just kind of looks weird to see a floating garden. Anyway, the techs are in there now.
Okay, Squall nodded, wondering why Irvine had felt the need to come all the way out here to tell him something that he could probably have seen on his own. In fact, as they got in closer, Squall could start to pick out machines and people running around in and outside of the garden even from here. He hadn't needed the update. Irvine fell into step behind Squall since walking abreast with him wasn't an option on these high, narrow walkways.
Say,
he called up.
Yeah.
Squall didn't look back.
I was kind of wondering.
Irvine trailed off and Squall stopped to turn to him.
Those technicians seem pretty handy. So would it be alright if I asked them to fix some other stuff?
Squall's eyebrow raised curiously. But it wasn't really an unreasonable request. So long as the technicians didn't mind. And
as long as it doesn't slow down the work on the garden, go ahead,
Squall shrugged.
Just try not to ask for too much. Oh, yeah, of course,
Irvine nodded quickly. The two of them started walking again. Irvine was silent, but Squall could just feel him waiting to say something else. He took a breath, paused, then hesitated. Squall resisted the urge to roll his eyes.
What?
Irvine grinned when Squall turned to face him.
It's Selfie. She's feeling down right now. I thought I should let you know. Since you're kind of like everybody's leader and everything.
Squall's eye twitched. Here they went with that leader crap again.
I think you should go talk to her,
Irvine continued.
I know you're a klutz when it comes to these things, so I'll back you up.
Squall resisted the urge to sigh. Whatever. It was a leader's duty to see to the safety and health of those under him. Even if it was mental health. And even if he didn't want to be leader.
Where is she?
He asked.
She's hanging out at the stage by the quad,
Irvine said quickly, grinning. Squall nodded and turned to continue walking. Irvine stayed behind him, practically humming in satisfaction. Until they turned up to the crane that was reaching out to the garden and they got a proper view of the long tubes of wires and oil and supplies connected to the hull in the garden. A hull that had already been pried open. They could see people moving on the outside of the garden from here. It was all rather impressive.
Wow!
Irvine breathed, stopping to take it all in.
I didn't expect all this heavy machinery.
Squall turned back, looking at him like he was fool. He kind of was.
How else were they going to repair it? With hammers and nails? Hey,
Irvine chuckled, holding up his hands to fend off the verbal attack.
This isn't exactly my department, you know. Then what is?
Squall asked, regretting the question immediately as it came from his mouth. Irvine smirked.
Guns and women, of course.
Squall resisted the urge to groan. Should have seen that one coming. Selfie had also showered since she had made it back to the garden. Her hair was still wet, yet miraculously still doing that flippy thing as she knelt down in the quad. She was munching without much enthusiasm on what looked like her third nutrition bar from the cafeteria. In one hand was what looked like a piece of the stage. The people that had started populating the quad were leaving her alone because she looked so dejected. As Squall and Irvine came in closer, her eyes darted to them, then back to her stage.
Whoa! This is so bad. Yeah,
Squall agreed, looking at it.
It's been pretty crazy, what with the garden moving and crashing into FH. A lot has happened. It's kind of hard to believe.
Selfie hummed sadly, standing up with a sigh.
You know, I really wanted to see a band perform on this stage. I even had my eyes set on a few people, too. Oh, well.
The dejected sigh that came from her was probably Squall's cue. He cleared his throat and tried to do his best comforting leader impression.
Come on. I'm sure you can still do something.
Nailed it. Selfie bucked in surprise, looking to him with raised eyebrows. The attempt had been kind of sad, but it was far more than anyone else had gotten from him.
Squall. Being sensitive? That's weird. You're the last person I expected to try to cheer me up. I must really look depressed. That's kind of depressing.
She sighed again. Squall frowned. And what was so weird about looking after her well-being? He cared. He was as human as anyone else. It's just that there were too many things that couldn't be helped. There is no point in talking over those things. A broken stage though? That could be helped. That could be worked around. No point in worrying, but that didn't mean it was a hopeless situation.
Uh-oh,
Selfie grinned at him.
There you go again into your own little world. And you're not gonna share it with us, hey? Didn't think so.
What was this? Why was she teasing him? He had just been trying to help.
Yeah, whatever.
Selfie smiled sadly.
Well, I think I'm feeling better. Don't worry about me, Squall. I'll be fine.
Squall opened his mouth to continue, because that was a lie if he had ever heard one. Then he hesitated because he realized he had nothing else. That there was about as much as he could do. He turned to Irvine, who was grinning at Selfie.
Irvine, you help her. I'm out of here. Alrighty.
Irvine's grin widened. Squall had the sneaking suspicion that being given control of the situation was what he had wanted all along. Squall started back out of the quad, letting out a long breath as he ran his hand through his hair. He just wanted to go train for a while. Relax a bit. He knew almost as soon as he had that thought that he wouldn't be able to. The intercom dinged happily over his head and he felt strangely precognizant about what was going to be called out over it.
Squall, this is the headmaster speaking,
Sid called out predictably.
Please come to my office.
What now? Squall straightened his back and started towards the Nexus. Selfie sighed again, kicking at some of the rubble.
I guess there's no point feeling blue. That's right.
Irvine grinned, flicking back his hat to beam at her.
It's no time to feel down. It's time to get the fun started.
Fun? Selfie repeated, looking at him.
What fun?
Irvine grinned, patting himself on the back mentally. He was so good.
So like. First, we'll ask the FH technicians if they can fix the stage. Squall already said I could. And if they can fix the garden, this should be a piece of cake for them.
Selfie bit her lip, trying not to look too excited.
Do you think they'll do it? Don't worry. I'll back you up. I'm sure they'll agree. Then, that means...
Selfie trailed off excitedly.
Yup.
Irvine beamed.
You can have your band perform on the stage. Hoo-hoo.
Selfie jumped up and down eagerly.
Alrighty. Let's get this show on the road.
And score, Irvine grinned. He was all set up to make his move. Selfie was practically eating out of his hand already.
That about covers my report on FH, sir,
Squall said, standing at attention before the headmaster on the deck.
I see.
Sid nodded.
I just got Selfie and Quistis's reports a moment ago as well. I'm quite relieved that everyone is back safe and sound. A little worse for the wear, but nothing that can't be fixed with some time and a few good meals. Oh, there is one more thing, sir,
Squall recalled.
It appeared that the Galbadians were searching for Elone. That seemed to be their main objective in FH. I believe that Sorceress Edia is behind this.
His voice stopped as he tried to think of why the sorceress would want Elone. Elone had the ability to allow people to experience the past. That was really the only special thing about her. She wasn't Seed. So the sorceress had to want her for that ability, right? What other reason could there be?
So now the Galbadians are working for the sorceress,
Sid sighed, his face suddenly appearing very aged and sad.
And they were searching for Elone. And regardless of whether they found her or not, they had orders to burn the city down. That would help reduce the number of potential places where she could hide.
Squall nodded in agreement.
Why Elone though? What does the sorceress want her for? That, I cannot guess. But, if she is after her, then I doubt it's anything good. Most likely, the sorceress will not stop this onslaught until Elone is found. She will continue to hunt her and burn everything in her path.
Sid sighed.
In that case, we can't wait any longer.
Squall nodded again. That meant the headmaster was finally going official. It was about time. It wasn't in Squall's nature to sit around and wait for things to happen. The intercom dinged happily and the headmaster brought the mic to his lips. He hesitated, and that beat of silence probably did more to capture the attention of the garden than the dings.
This is Headmaster Sid. I have an announcement to make.
Irvine and Selfie, out in the quad talking to the FH technicians, stopped and looked up at the seriousness of the headmaster's tone.
I have important news that I must share with all of you. The garden is being repaired right now. We'll leave FH immediately after it's finished. We're going on a journey.
Quistis, who had been laughing with Drive Katawaki, turned with her to look up at the intercom.
This is a journey a long time in the making. One I have trained you, my seeds and cadets alike, for since the moment of garden's conception. We are going to face the sorceress. The garden will now be used as our mobile base.
Zell, back in the hot dog line, growled in anticipation. He knocked into someone as he ran away, for once his mind not on food.
The administration of the garden will be run by myself and the staff as usual. The underclassmen and the trainees shall continue their education under our guidance. However, this journey will involve many battles.
Rinoa looked up from the bookshelf she had been perusing.
A well-qualified leader is needed to guide us. Someone whose integrity is unquestioned and whose skills are unmatched. Therefore, I am appointing Squall Leonhardt as your new leader.
Rinoa gasped. Not because she was excited, not because she was proud, though she was, but because she could just see Squall's face. There was no way he had agreed to this. She turned from the bookshelf and ran.
From now on, Squall will be in charge. He will decide our destination and battle plans as best suited for the needs of fighting the sorceress.
Squall was lucky the headmaster's back was turned, because he couldn't keep the slack-jawed look of disbelief off of his face. Was he serious?
Everyone,
Sid continued into the mic,
please do your best to follow his orders to the best of your abilities.
Squall shook his head. He couldn't believe it.
If there are any objections, please come see me in person.
Yeah, Squall had an objection. He didn't even get a choice. The intercom dinged happily again and the headmaster turned back to Squall with a smile.
Squall, we're under your command from now on. This is your fate. It is your destiny to lead the way in defeating the sorceress. Don't talk about this like it's been decided since my birth.
Squall snapped, shouting as he threw out his arm. Headmaster Sid started, surprised. Squall turned away from him and quickly hit the descend button on the lift. He thought the headmaster calling out to him, but he couldn't hear it over the rushing of blood in his own ears. He jumped off of the platform before it fully reached the bottom and walked quickly towards the elevator. He really wasn't thinking. He just knew that he had to get out of here. The doors slid open and there was Rinoa. She caught sight of him and her hand immediately came up as though reaching out for him. Squall stepped into the elevator. One hand reached out and slammed against the panel. His other hand closed around Rinoa's. Without looking, he had accidentally hit against the emergency stop button and the elevator locked down. He didn't much care though. He had brought up Rinoa's hand to his face and he was breathing in her scent as he resisted the urge to just collapse around her. He was stronger than this, he chanted in his head. He didn't need to hold her. He didn't need to seek her comfort. He didn't need anyone. Yet he remained there, in the silence of the elevator, refusing to lift his eyes from where he had lowered them over Rinoa's hand.
Squall!
Her voice was soft, a beacon in the darkness. He was drawn to it even as something in him screamed that he should back away quickly. He didn't respond. He remained standing there for a few long tense minutes that could have been hours. Time was just stretching on. He didn't want to move forward or beg. He didn't actually know what it was that he wanted. Finally, calmly, Rinoa reached out and started the elevator up again. She wanted to hold him. She wanted to take his head in hand and kiss away his troubles. She wanted to let him release some of that pent-up stress and frustration with her body. But he wasn't ready for that yet. That kind of intimacy, for a man who was still actively trying to avoid such intimacy, wouldn't be welcome. So she did the only thing she could do. She let him hold on to her as the elevator lowered itself down to the first floor. Then, when they stepped out, she grabbed onto him so it wasn't so obvious that he needed the crutch. She walked him to his dorm and sat him on his bed.
"I'm sorry, Squall,"
she said, brushing his hair from his face as she stroked his cheek.
"But, for what it's worth, I think you are a great leader."
Squall heard her voice echoing in his head as she left him alone. Which was exactly what he wanted and the exact opposite of what he wanted. He wanted her. He wanted to hold on to her. He wanted to lay his head next to hers and just draw in the sweetness of her scent while having her soft body in hand. Then he wanted to kiss her until he couldn't think anymore. Drown his sorrows in her. And, at the exact same time, the thought of it made him want to run. To hide. It made him, there was no other word for it, scared. Why was everything in his life blowing up at the same time? It was all supposed to be so easy after he made Seed. Go on his missions. Follow his orders. Live or die by his sword. Then either retire to a small house on the edge of Balam or the grave. Now he was leader of every Seed, cadet, and student in this garden. Now he was being forced to face a sorceress in combat. The headmaster's wife. Well, it wasn't like he minded fighting the sorceress. Right? Garden trains Seeds. Seeds defeat the sorceress. So, the battle against her would be inevitable as long as he was a Seed. As long as he was a Seed? What if he quit? Just leave. Then what? What did he have left? Would Rinoa come with him? Would the others try to stop him? Did he even have skills that could translate into a normal life outside of the garden? He supposed he could hire himself out as a mercenary. But how would that be any different? He just would no longer have the backing of garden. He didn't even want to think about it. Just, for once in your life, stop thinking. End of chapter.